Welcome to this new edition of Inside the Huddle right here on High School Cube News, brought to you by Danley's Garage Builders. Brian Chimino with you once again with Mike Clark of the Sun-Times and Beth Long of Fox Sports and Scout.com. And it's semifinals coming up this week. Let's talk about some of the quarterfinals that took place this past weekend, Mike. Let's start with Montini, the 5-peat, still alive after a dramatic win over Joliet Catholic, 22-21. Talk about Nile Sykes, what he did that game.
It's something that's been in the works for quite a while. They used him in the backfield. He ran in a touchdown, and he also scored the 2-point conversion with about 4 minutes left that won it. One of the other interesting things about that is they use their bazooka package, which puts most of their good defenders on the offensive side of the ball, including Dylan Thompson, blocking for Nile Sykes, which is a pretty tough combination there.
You put two guys that are going to be really big Division I prospects or already are on offense, you're probably going to get the points. And certainly Nile proved that. He actually just had an offer from Notre Dame, so he had a really big week. Not only did he put the winning points on the board, he also added an offer from the Irish.
And in that losing effort, we're talking about Michael Ivelo, 246 yards, 3 touchdowns. He kind of was quietly in the shadow of Justin Jackson this year, but just a great senior season.
One of the things that you look at him, I mean, he is not a big kid. He is not a real fast kid, but man, I'm not sure anybody had a better season than he did, given the talent that he had. He had another 240 yards, 3 more touchdowns, including a 47-yard run, so it showed he did have a little bit of breakaway speed.
Absolutely. Anytime you can do that on Montini's defense, like we said, some of the best prospects in the entire state are on that defense. That's a pretty impressive day.
Looking in Class 8A, the Loyola defense just continues to bully teams around. They shut out Maine South 35-0. It's the first time Maine South has been shut out in 15 years under Coach Sarah. This Loyola defense just a bunch of bullies.
Charlie Pontarelli, who's going to be the MVP this week, is the force up on the line. He's had 5 sacks the last 2 weeks. Jack Gleason is leader of their secondary. He had 3 picks against Maine South.
I feel like Loyola is the epitome of the old saying defense wins championships, and certainly they're the team to beat.
And looking ahead to the semifinals this weekend, speaking of Loyola, in Class 8A, they'll face a Stevenson Patriots squad, making their first appearance in the semifinals since 2002.
Stevenson's one of those teams that is good every year, but they run up against some tough competition. This year, the impressive thing is they lost their best lineman, Zach Novoselsky, early in the season. They lost Matt Morrissey for a couple of games. He hasn't played the last 2 games. They've beaten 2 really good teams. That's going to be a pretty good test for Loyola, I would think.
The key for them is Cameron Green, and I mean, that's no surprise. He's had 2 really big games in the past 2 weeks. He's a big prospect. He's a junior. He has offers from Purdue, from Illinois. He's had monster games, and oddly enough, when Morrissey was in the game, the reps were split between the 2 of them. So it seems like Green is making up for every absence that Morrissey may have had in the offense, but I still think that team is better when Matt Morrissey's on the field.
In the other half of Class 8A, you have Naperville Central and Marist. Both teams came into the playoffs with 6-3 records, and they both find themselves in the semifinals.
It seems like every year there's somebody that kind of rises up a little bit to the occasion. We talked a little bit at the beginning of the year about Naperville Central being a really tough conference at DuPage Valley. They had a rough run there. They lost 3 games in a row. They wound up 4th in the conference, and they're in the Final 4 in 8A. But, they've had a huge win last week over Neuqua Valley. It seems like they're clicking. Marist is a team that's really gotten a lot better on defense the last few weeks with Nick Wisher and Flynn Nagel playing defense. We've talked about this, but you can't really overstate how much of an impact they've had.
I don't think there is a hotter team in the state than Marist. They've outperformed even what we thought they could do up to this point in the playoffs. So if meeting an opponent like that in Naperville Central, it should be a very interesting matchup that lots of top prospects on the field for that one, too.
Looking at Class 7A, it kind of seems like these 2 teams like to play football in November. We're talking about the top seed, Lake Zurich Bears and Glenbard West.
Yeah, I saw Lake Zurich this past weekend in the rain at Wheaton North. It was terrible conditions for both teams, obviously. Probably hurt Wheaton North more because of Clayton Thorson and their passing attack. Lake Zurich loves this kind of weather. I mean, they've got not a real diverse or complicated offense, but what they do so well. Lake Zurich is another one of those defensive teams. Colton Moskal is probably the big name, the guy who's going to Syracuse, but Lake Zurich in the semis 5 straight years, 7 times out of 8 years.
And a real quick look at Class 5A. Everybody knows the events this past weekend that took place in Central Illinois. We're talking about Washington. They're in the semifinals against Sacred Heart Griffin, playing with Heavy Hearts.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation for them for sure. I mean, you know, obviously getting to this point in the playoffs is a dream for everybody, but, you know, we've all seen the pictures on TV and the newspapers of the devastation for that community, and it's really a tight-knit community. I mean, I've got a little bit of experience, you know, covering some of the teams down there, and you know, every one of those communities, Washington, East Peoria, Pekin, the Peoria schools, I mean, they're all very tight-knit, all very sports-oriented communities, and you know, it's going to be a tough thing for the kids and the communities to focus on football this weekend, but you know, hopefully that can help the healing process.
And you can check out the entire full brackets right here on High School Cube News. Beth, before we leave, any recruiting stuff?
2 guys committed. One of our former MVPs, Chris James, chose Pittsburgh over Wisconsin and Michigan State. It was a tight battle between Wisconsin and Pittsburgh in the end. In the end, he's a Panther. And Matt Bigowski of Wheaton North chose Illinois State.
That'll do it for this edition of Inside the Huddle right here on High School Cube News, brought to you by Danley's Garage Builders. Tune in for a new edition next week as we preview the state championships taking place from DeKalb. Brian Chimino with you with Mike Clark and Beth Long. We'll see you guys next week.